Welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered, the go-to podcast for anything and everything retail crime related. I'm your host, Professor Emmeline Taylor. Welcome to this episode of Retail Crime Uncovered. I'm really excited to be recording this episode in London at City University of London. I'm joined today by Detective Chief Superintendent Jim Taylor. He's the head of Opal, which I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about. Jim, welcome so much to Retail Crime Uncovered. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here.
So you're the head of Opal. It's the National Intelligence Unit for Acquisitive Crime. Tell us a little bit more about Opal and the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. Opal is a national team which is funded by all the police forces in England and Wales. And we work with those forces and other law enforcement agencies like the National Crime Agency, Europol, Border Force. And we use intelligence from all the different forces to help combat serious and organised acquisitive crime. So that means vehicle crime, burglaries, robberies, and most recently, retail crime. So the team is centrally funded, but it operates across all force boundaries, including Scotland and Northern Ireland. Like I say, our kind of sole purpose really is to identify and enhance information intelligence to combat serious and organised crime, where people cross borders, force boundaries, and commit that crime, so that we can then identify the organised crime groups responsible, make sure they're managed properly, and actually start doing something about the crimes that perhaps slip under the radar through normal force arrangements. Yeah,
absolutely. And because it's interesting, isn't it? With acquisitive crime, I think the general public think about individual burglaries or a car theft and don't necessarily realise that this can be elevated to organised crime groups.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you get travelling groups up and down the country, and exploiting actually the lack of coordination sometimes with forces and the lack of information sharing. I think forces are really adept at managing local crimes and local crime series, no problem at all. But when you get offenders moving into the borders and then moving away very quickly, that can be quite difficult to investigate and coordinate some of that information. So my team basically bring all that information together, get a really clear picture of what's happening nationally, and target those offenders effectively.
And so last year, a new strand was initiated and it was dubbed Operation Pegasus for a while, but that's folded into Operation Opal now, isn't it? And it specifically looks at retail crime. What sort of intelligence are you looking at? Can you tell us a bit about how that strand will operate?
Yeah, so Pegasus obviously was the group of retailers come together to come up with the idea, with spearheaded by Katie Bourne and PCC, who's got the portfolio for business crime. And that afforded effectively an opportunity for Opal to put together a capability for the UK to focus on organised retail crime. So again, we're not talking about pockets of offending where local forces can manage that effectively. This is about individuals who are travelling around the country and exploiting, like I say, that lack of coordination. So the kind of conversations we had really early on was, what does organised retail crime look like? And that is very different to perhaps what policing might think is organised crime. And what the perception might be of some of the bigger retailers. So it was really important for me to understand what organised retail crime looks like. Now, there's lots of rhetoric around policing not attending, enough incidents. And I understand that. And if we're only attending a small amount of incidents, that means we're missing a big piece of the intelligence picture that sits behind it. So one of the key things I wanted to do was make sure that we were going to blend police data and industry data to have a really clear view of what organised retail crime is. So the first task of the team is to put together a strategic assessment. And that is a kind of foot on the ball moment really to understand what the current picture looks like of organised retail crime now, what we can do to combat it, and then put in place recommendations for forces and retailers as well to help us stem the problem. So that's kind of part one, and that was the first objective that came out of the initial meeting.
Just thinking about that data, because sometimes retail can be quite reluctant to share data for one reason or another. It might not be in a format that is easily shareable. They might be worried about competition. How have you managed to sort of overcome that?
I think that's a really good point. And actually, what was really evident in the early days when I spoke with the Pegasus group was that they put aside their kind of competitive differences and recognised that there was one goal that they wanted to achieve, which was combat the organised crime. In terms of information sharing, you're right. A lot of the retailers are really concerned around GDPR. Sharing data that they shouldn't be able to, and I think there still exists a lot of confusion around GDPR.
Yes.
Which, in this day and age, there shouldn't be, if I'm honest. We should be able to cut through it. Sharing information proportionately and necessarily is laid out within the code. The bonus, I think, and the benefit of coming into policing is that we can cut through GDPR, and we can share information that we believe is in prevention and detection of crime, is proportionate, and it is necessary to share that. And I think with the experience that my team have in terms of information intelligence management, we are probably far more effective to be able to do that centrally than a group of retailers trying to do it, it fragmented, really. So, yeah.
And so in terms of the data that you're receiving, what would indicate to you that this is an organised crime group rather than, say, a prolific individual or group of individuals? What elevates it to that organised crime
so
gang?
what we're looking for really is, there is a specific definition of what an organised crime group is: 2 or 3 people acting in furtherance of a criminal purpose. And our understanding and what we are looking to achieve really is to target those individuals who are causing the highest harm, who are exploiting borders. If you've got a group of individuals who are targeting 1 or 2 local stores, well, that's quite easily dealt with locally.
Yeah.
The bit that we want to do is make sure that we have that kind of clear view and track individuals around the country, and make sure they don't continue to commit those high impact offences. So, the difference being is kind of like the higher level. We're looking at individuals who, are the highest threat. So we will be scoring organised crime groups to understand what capability and intent they have, but also what threat, harm and risk they pose. So individuals who are committing violent acts, individuals who are exploiting the vulnerable to commit the offences, high value items that they're stealing, or just absolutely prolific. Some of them may be organised crime groups, others may not be, but we're still going to be targeting those individuals and making sure that police forces are aware of them, giving them packages to take away and deal with the offenders.
So you would gather up all the intelligence that you can on an individual or a group, it has to be a group, doesn't it, that might be travelling around the country. And then how do you identify which police force you're going to sort of deliver that to? I imagine sometimes there's a bit of resistance if it's a particularly big case.
Yeah, there can be. I mean, we've had agreement from Chiefs Council for all the chief constables to agree to what we're doing. We've met with all the heads of ROCUs to ensure that when we map organised crime groups in the retail space, this is a new thing for them. They're used to drugs and guns and exploitation, but they're not used to retail crime. But it has to hit the right threshold. We're not talking about that local level offending. It has to be organised crime, and what we can't do is manipulate the process to get them scored as an organised crime group just because it's retail crime.
I mean, you mentioned like firearms and drugs, etc. I've got 2 questions really. One is around polycriminality. So are you seeing these individuals that target retail using that money to fund other illicit activity? And I guess my second question is then, why are they targeting retail? If these organised criminal gangs used to do drugs and firearms, is it that retail has now become such a soft option? Is that perhaps why we're seeing this uptick in organised retail criminal groups?
I think, if you look at the phenomenon around steaming offences, a group of individuals going into, a high-tech store and just ripping out expensive items, they know that the police attendance won't be immediate. They know that actually the follow-up to it might be regarded as just retail crime and not really considered as organised crime. Because of that lack of joined up and coordination that we just talked about. So perhaps, people are seeing it as a softer option. The items, in some instances that people are going after, you see in some of the sports shops, high value clothing, footwear and accessories, as well as that tech. So I think it's very attractive. It's, quite popular, isn't it, those items? And yeah, I think, that is probably considered by some as an easy option. Yeah, for sure.
And so we're about, 5 months in since the launch of Pegasus as the retail crime strand of Opal. Are there any early findings, anything that's been uncovered at this point, or is it too soon?
It's probably a little bit too soon. I mean, the team are working on a few investigations at the moment. Our first live kind of referral process, our tasking process, is set to be on the 1st of May. And the reason why that is, obviously, as you can imagine, so the team, some of them landed in early January. We're still recruiting the last couple of roles now. It takes a period of time to embed within police systems. Some of them have not come from a policing background, which is great from a kind of diverse kind of viewpoint as well. So we have to get a degree of training. Yeah. The next step is for us to be able to put a training package together for the retailers so that they can engage with us. What was really clear about was that, if we put a small team together, which we have, we couldn't deal with 20 different retailers to give us information in 20 different ways. Yeah. We needed them all to give us information in the same way. So we've developed an organised retail crime assessment tool so that retailers will be able to effectively score that themselves to understand whether or not what they're reporting is organised retail crime. The next stage is for them to complete a problem profile, which is a referral form, effectively. What this isn't is a substitute for reporting.
Right, okay.
Crime. Yeah. So all the stores will still need to report all their crimes in the usual way. And in fact, if they report things to Opal, we will always insist that if you're reporting stuff to us, you need to report to the police and it needs to be investigated locally as well. The bit that we'll be doing is obviously those referral packages will come in, hopefully as of the 1st of May, and then we will decide which ones are the highest threat, harm and risk and the ones that we will work on. Obviously the capacity issues within the team, it's only a small team.
Yeah, of course. And I imagine you might then be getting the same referral from different retailers who are seeing the same individuals targeting them, but they weren't aware that they are.
That would
perhaps.
be perfect. Ideally,
like one gang that's affecting everybody.
No, that would be ideal because it helps us then understand the scale and scope of the criminality that they're reporting, and it helps us kind of prioritise which are the gangs that are affecting the most retailers. Yeah. So actually that is the ideal situation. And then there'll be scoring mechanisms as well put in place to understand how we should prioritise, those individuals causing, violence and threatening behaviour, weapons involved, exploitation of the vulnerable. Those kind of investigations will race to the top of the pile because we need to protect people, and that's got to be the overarching kind of objective of this initiative, really. Yeah.
And so the initial funding is for 2 years, is that correct? Yeah. What would success look like after those 2 years for you? What would make you think, job done, this is brilliant?
Yeah, I think we thought long and hard about this and around what performance measures we should put in place. And I think, to say you've been successful because we've arrested lots of people is a difficult measure to put in place. Saying, stores are reporting huge amounts of, better shrinkage, factors, I think is also a difficult one. I think for me, success looks like we've identified a number of organised crime groups. When we look at those groups, they've been managed locally and they have been disrupted. So there is a process in place of how we manage organised crime groups now. And those performance measures are very relevant to organised retail crime as well. So we'll be able to reflect back and say, right, we've identified this many OCGs, we've recorded this many SOC disruptions against them, and we've received X amount of packages resulting in arrests and seizures and so on. So whilst we will record some of that, I wouldn't want to hang my hat on to say, arrests are a measure, because I'm not sure we can arrest our way out of this problem.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree with that. Now, obviously, the way that this retail crime strand of Opal is funded is by retailers collaborating to co-fund it. There was some controversy around that early on, I think. Now, obviously, you're a police officer. Do you have any concerns with that? Or what would you like to say in terms of that sort of more controversial perspective?
Yeah, I can see that. And I think some of the commentary at the time in the press was, is this the start of privatisation of policing and similar kind of comments. And I understand the view around that. The reality is the cuts to policing is well rehearsed. We all know, and I don't think we need to go back and talk about that any further. But with the increase in crime and demand on policing, something's got to give. And our attention to retail crime, quite frankly, had fallen behind. And I think there's a national recognition of that. The Retail Crime Action Plan has now really been put in place and is giving forces guidance around that. But I think when kind of we came together with Pegasus and they suggested that they could fund the policing unit. Well, we've already done similar things within Opal before, and so I knew it was possible. There are other private public sector collaborations in policing, certainly in the city with finances around fraud, which is working really, really well. So I knew it was possible. The reality was, and I made it really, really clear to the Pegasus group at the start, was that we are the police and we police without fear or favour. And we will not be the private police service of a major high street retailer.
Okay.
There is no special favours because individuals pay into the Pegasus partnership. So this initiative is for all retailers, with the caveat, of course, is that we will only go after the highest threat, harm and risk. I think, yes, I agree, should policing be able to do this? Yes, we should. Can we do it with our resourcing and the demands that we face? No, we couldn't. No. And I think this is a great solution. And after 2 years, I think we could all sit back and reflect and say, has it worked or hasn't it? Yeah. And then we think about the next steps about what we can do. And
so it's not a sort of pay-to-play type setup, isn't it? So any retailer could complete that initial assessment form to say they feel that they might be being targeted by organised gangs. Yes. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right, yeah. But again, the caveat being is that it's the highest threat, harm and risk. So, we're looking at that cross-border criminality, so if you think about a local corner shop who would like to put a referral in, if they're an independent, whilst I absolutely sympathise with the issues they may have, their local police force would be the best people to investigate that because they can put the right resources and understand the local picture far better than we can. The bit that we're focused on is that kind of travelling around the country, high harm individuals.
And I think it is, it's important, isn't it? Because we talk about offenders as if they're sort of a homogenous group, but actually we've got the organised criminal gangs, you've got your prolific drug affected offenders, you've got your opportunists, and I think each and every one of those different individuals or groups do need to be treated differently because there's different root causes, there's different deterrents that would then prevent them from offending. Now, you mentioned some of the press coverage of Pegasus when it first came about, and I think there was some confusion around facial recognition in some of those early newspaper reports that I saw. How is facial recognition part of Opal and the investigation of serious acquisitive crime?
Yeah, so facial recognition has been used within the Police National Database for some time now, and actually all forces have got access to that. So if you get crime scene images, you can put that through the Police National Database, and hopefully it will make a recognition of an individual. There are just under 19 million images, custody images on P&D, which is a great tool for policing. Why wouldn't we use it? And I think when we started out on this initiative, there are so many companies out there that hold information on behalf of companies that we can tap into. Now, what we're not going to do is utilise live facial recognition at this stage. And there are no immediate plans to.
So this is reactive. It's that you already have a good clear image from CCTV, and then you can run it against the PND to see if there's a match. So it's not triggering as soon as somebody walks through the door, this is Jim Taylor or
No, and again, this is something for the retailers to consider. By all means, if that's something they want to bring in their own business model, that's for them to consider. But of course, a lot of the retailers worry about the customer experience, and they don't want people to feel, oppressed when they walk into their store, and that's totally understandable and acceptable. But for us, why wouldn't we use a tool where we can have an image of a suspect and then try and identify them? Equally, when we've got a partner, and if we go to them and say, have you got this image on your database? And they may come back and say, yes, we've identified them previously because they committed offences in this store. Well, again, that helps us. Now, facial recognition is a great intelligence tool. But there still needs to be that element of corroboration as well. So we need to be able to evidence the fact that the suspect was there at the time, or another way of proving the offence. It's a good intelligence tool, but it won't always convict individuals.
Yeah. I mean, would you envisage then, say you have got a serious organised criminal group, that you would run an image through the PND and they would ping up all over the country that they've been targeting, 1 week they're in Coventry, then they're in Nottingham? Is that the type of thing that it would come back with?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, PND is going to be developed over a period of time, and ultimately what we want is a central kind of repository where crime scene images are lay on the database, and as soon as someone gets arrested, they can do that crime scene to custody image. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it'll come in time, I'm sure. But what my team will be doing is, when we get those referrals in, we'll be going to PND to see if we can identify the suspects on the scene images that we have directly. And equally, when those individuals commit multiple offences, well, the team working on that case should know that anyway. So it should marry up in the middle.
One of the sort of ways that organised gangs work, from what I've heard, is that they might recruit sort of vulnerable people in different locations and almost treat them as quite disposable. So if their faces started to be recognised, they would just simply, abandon them and recruit other vulnerable individuals. How do you begin to unpick that? Because it's almost the higher up people that are not then being exposed to leaving any sort of evidence trail.
I think you've just really well kind of explained why Opal and Pegasus is so needed, because exactly that. The local officer will turn up and see your vulnerable individual being sent in and deal with what's in front of them, and then go through the criminal justice process but the team will be able to see those individuals, alongside those vulnerable people. So a good case at the moment, without going into too many specifics, is, we picked up on a national operation, the individual going into a shop and committing offences. Well, that as a standalone can be dealt with. But actually, through the investigations, we were able to unpick that a vulnerable individual was being used to potentially ferry them around the country. So that is a really good example where Opal can unpick some of that.
And just reveals a sort of
that
network.
Kind of hidden criminality and organised element underneath it. So absolutely good example of why we're needed.
So we mentioned facial recognition. What other sort of intelligence tools do you use? I imagine sort of automatic number plate recognition. Are there other sort of intelligence gathering?
So police intelligence, is well documented on the internet and in the press as well. But ANPR, automatic number plate recognition. Mobile telephony, again, really, really important. There's open source data mining that, we can utilise as well. We're in talk with lots of companies who would like to work with us to utilise their platforms, which is really, really encouraging. But ultimately, this is about information intelligence, and this is about the exploitation of as much information that we can get our hands on around retail crime. So databases from private companies, the retailers themselves, those are going to be so important for us to bring together that big picture.
Yeah, definitely. Hearing you talk, it really reminds me of that TV show Hunted, which, if people haven't seen it, it's individuals essentially going on the run, isn't it? And sort of having to go off grid because of the amount of data that we shed just through everyday transactions, phone calls, web browsing. So I guess that must leave quite a nice trail for you to then follow in terms of these gangs.
Absolutely, it does, and we rely on that information, and the old days of eyewitnesses, are still really important. Of course they are, but actually there's so much more available to us now. The GPRS data on your telephone, tracking data on telephones, cell site analysis, all these things that we can tap into. Of course, we're highly regulated, and we have to go through the right channels to obtain that information. But it is available to us if the criminality is at the right level.
Yeah, wow. Jim, it's hard to believe you're coming up to 30 years service with the police, which means possibly retirement.
Yes.
What are your plans for the future? I mean, Opal, you're the head of that, and it seems to be going from strength to strength. Is that something that you would want to leave behind?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? So 30 years of policing, can't believe it. But opportunities really for the future. I love this type of work. I'm really passionate about intelligence and organised crime as well. It's kind of run through my veins throughout most of my career. So I'd love to stay in this space, but who knows what the future holds. I have to wait and see, I guess. Yeah.
So you weren't always involved in acquisitive crime. You used to head up homicide and missing persons investigations as well.
Yes.
What are your sort of standout moments from your career? Were there particular cases or?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a homicide investigator for a number of years, and I think being a senior investigator on a murder investigation is probably in policing one of the biggest responsibilities you could have, but also probably one of the biggest privileges as well. I think to investigate someone's death is a really, really important part of policing, but one that you shouldn't take lightly as well. So I think there are a number of cases that spring to mind. There was a tragic homicide in Bristol, of an individual following a fight, which resulted in some kind of covert policing activity as well. And that gave us the evidence to convict for a murder rather than a manslaughter. So things like that, really resonate with me. And I think, going that extra mile, certainly in homicide investigations, to try and convict people is something I was really passionate about and still am.
Definitely. So you've had a few proud moments throughout your career, but I understand that you were the recipient of a National Bravery Award. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're going back a long time now, Emmeline. So 20 years ago, I was with colleagues and we were in London following up on a case. And as we were driving down a kind of South London street, a gunfight ensued in front of us.
Oh my gosh. And you're off duty at this point?
No, we were working, but we were in plain clothes and we
Yeah.
were in plain cars and no protective equipment at the time because we were there just doing some follow-up inquiries. And two individuals were fighting over a firearm, and the firearm was, effectively being shot in the air and across our vehicle. Obviously, extremely scary for the community and individuals and it was actually quite a busy street that day. And myself and some colleagues intervened, and two individuals were, like I say, fighting for possession of this pistol. It was. And we detained them both and arrested them. One had been shot, not fatally, but nastily, obviously. And we recovered a pistol, a fully functioning pistol, MAC-10 submachine gun.
Oh my goodness! I mean, they meant business then.
Yeah. And one of them, I think, at the time was wanted for a homicide, a gang-related homicide. So I think that was like a gang dispute, which would have ended up with someone being fatally wounded, I've no doubt. So we arrested them and seized the firearms and received an award for that, which is a very proud moment.
Gosh, I mean, it just sounds terrifying as well.
Yeah.
Do you think you can ever, once you've been a police officer for so long, and I guess it just sort of runs through your veins, do you think you ever can actually sort of give that up and take up golf? I don't know.
Probably taken up golf. I think there comes a time when you just do need to give it up, and I think you can always look back and be proud of what you've been part of and achieved in your own career, definitely. But I think there does naturally come a time where you do want to kind of step away from it a little bit, and it's changed. Policing's changed so much in the 30 years that I've been in. But I've got no problems with walking away from it, if I'm honest.
Oh, Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks very much, Emmeline.